Marge Wells prided herself on her intuition. As the longtime cook at Jenna's Diner in the center of Lilybridge, she knew that noticing the small things was crucial. She recognized when Agnes, the local florist, showed up wearing new perfume to impress her secret beau. She could tell when old Mr. Lynch's back was troubling him by the way he favored his left side on the vinyl stools, but she never expected to overhear a detail quite so intriguing as the whisper of a hidden lockbox in the town's abandoned train station. It all started on a slow Thursday afternoon, just after the lunch rush. Two women Marge had never met before slid into booth 3, which rested in a corner that allowed for hushed conversation under the hum of the overhead fans. Between the daily special and the check, Marge picked up a few startling words: lockbox and scandal, followed by the name of the old Lilybridge train station. Intrigued, Marge lingered moments longer than necessary while tending their table, offering refills on iced tea and suggesting the fresh peach pie. She caught half-sentences. Someone found it in the station basement. Secret files about the mayor. And always wondered why they shut it down so suddenly. It was hardly enough to make sense of, yet it set Marge's mind spinning. While Lilybridge was known for small-town charm, family-owned shops, a single stoplight on Main Street, and gossip that rivaled the big city tabloids, it wasn't known for scandal. The train station had sat empty for nearly 20 years, a stately but dilapidated relic of a busier era. Could there be something hidden in its dusty corridors that still mattered? Later that evening, Marge's mind refused to settle. She stayed behind at Jenna's Diner, clear across from the railroad tracks that led to the shuttered station. The sun sank, painting the sky with streaks of orange. She wiped down the counters in slow, thorough strokes, eyes wandering out the big front windows. Through the thick summer heat, she could just make out the decaying silhouette of the station. She knew in her bones that something was stirring there, a secret that might bring old histories crawling out of the woodwork. Before turning off the lights, she picked up her phone to dial her friend Harriet Parks, the local librarian. If anyone had a lead on old Lilybridge legends, Harriet would. Harriet was halfway through closing the library when Marge's call came in. "I've heard rumors that there were boxes left behind," Harriet said, her voice echoing slightly across the phone line, "but I always figured anything important was cleared out when the station shut down. Still, during Lilybridge's railroad heyday, records might have been kept there." Harriet promised to poke around the library archives for any mention of a lockbox or unusual train station records. Her curiosity was just as piqued as Marge's. Never ones to resist a good puzzle, they agreed to meet in Harriet's office the next afternoon. By the time they hung up, Roosevelt Street was eerily quiet. Only the street lamp outside the diner glowed, illuminating the old train tracks like they were leading to a story waiting to be told. The next day, Marge arrived at the library after her breakfast shift. She slid into Harriet's cramped office, where boxy filing cabinets left little room for the battered wooden desk. Harriet had pulled several dusty tomes from the Lilybridge local history section. "Look here," Harriet said, tapping a yellowed page of the Lilybridge Gazette, dated August 1980. "Doesn't say lockbox, but there's mention of a rumored deposit left behind by a station agent named Leopold Finch." Marge squinted at the faded type. Finch had apparently been quite a fixture, known for enthusiastic announcements and a devotion to the station's upkeep. Then one day he vanished, leaving behind a swirling rumor of missing funds from the railway's accounts. Marge's excitement flared. Maybe that deposit wasn't just rumored. Could the lockbox be Finch's? Digging deeper, Harriet switched to a microphone machine with a practiced flick of the wrist. A hum filled the office as reels whirred. Together they read accounts of the train station's abrupt closure, mechanical issues, decreased passenger traffic, budget cuts. A host of reasons, but none of them conclusively explained why Lilybridge parted ways with the once thriving rail line so quickly. Among the black and white lines of text, small references to financial irregularities popped up. Finch's name appeared more than once in controversies over budgeting. Despite the insinuations, no official charges were ever filed. The deeper they looked, the more they suspected Finch had left behind something that might prove his innocence or guilt. Marge thought of the trademark hush that enveloped the station. Perhaps it was waiting to surrender its secrets. The pair decided to follow their hunch. Harriet offered to accompany Marge inside the old station over the weekend, though the place was rumoured to be locked tight. Marge refused to rely on slippery rumours alone. She had a resource. Gil Talbot, the local handyman who seemed to collect keys to Lilybridge's older buildings like a child collects baseball cards. Gil was a friend and would occasionally come in for coffee and conversation at the diner. He was also known for being discreet, well aware that sometimes folks in Lilybridge just wanted to keep their curiosities to themselves. Sure enough, the next morning when he stopped by for his usual black coffee, he admitted he had an old ring of keys, inherited from his father, who'd once supervised building maintenance all round Lilybridge, including the station. "I can't promise anything," Gil said, "but I'll see if there's one that might fit." On Saturday afternoon, Harriet and Marge met Gil outside the station's chain-link fence. The sun was warm, though an autumn breeze began to carry the faint sound of distant church bells. The building looked grand in a shabby way, tall windows covered in grime, a wide marble staircase leading up to an unlocked set of iron doors. The guardhouse next to it had long since been abandoned, its sign reading "Station Master" peeled to near illegibility. Gil flipped through the keys, selecting a wide brass one. To Marge's relief, it slid into the lock on the main entrance with only a minor protest of rust. A few twists, a push on the heavy door, and they were inside. Dust motes floated in the stale air, illuminated by the beams of golden light seeping through cracked window panes. Echoes of footsteps on marble floors raised goosebumps on Marge's arms. With flashlights in hand, they made their way deeper, passing chipped benches and a ticket counter. Broken shards of glass from overhead lamps crunched underfoot. Harriet pointed out a corridor that led to the station offices. Gil tried several more keys before one opened a small office door. Inside, boxes of papers lay in disarray, some spilled across the floor. An old desk sat in one corner, drawers askew, their metal handles rusted. Harriet scoured the labels on the scattered files, timetables, employee rosters, an out-of-date ledger. These told of daily operations, but they weren't what Marge imagined when she thought hidden lockbox. Drawing her flashlight along the walls, Harriet noticed a door behind a tall metal filing cabinet. The three of them exchanged conspiratorial glances. They shoved the cabinet aside, which screeched across the floor. A door with a single brass knob led into the station basement. Even though Harriet's face betrayed unease, she followed Gil with Marge behind. The narrow stairs groaned under their weight, and the air grew colder with every step. The scent of mildew and something else, maybe old cardboard, rotting from dampness, hung in the darkness. Their flashlights revealed a cramped labyrinth of boxes, crates, and tangled rubbish. Marge felt her heart speed up with each dusty corner they checked. That hush from upstairs seemed even more pronounced here. A reverential quiet that made her think of secrets buried a little too well. 15 minutes passed before Harriet gave a sudden yelp of excitement. "Marge! Gil! Over here!" Wedged behind a broken trunk was a small wooden crate labeled "Station Master." Inside was padding of old newspapers and a squarish metal box with a combination lock. An excited hush fell over them as they set the box gently on a nearby crate. It was heavy, the metal tarnished with age. "We found it," Gil breathed. The emotional weight of the moment held them all in a stunned hush, as though Finch's ghost was hovering near, waiting to see if his secrets would be forced into the light. Braced by a wave of adrenaline, they carried the box up to the musty office, setting it on the old desk. Attempts to pry the lock open gently proved futile. Pulling a hairpin from Harriet's purse was no help either. Gil frowned, said he'd try to coax it open with some tools, but his best efforts only dented the lock. They needed the combination, or a more serious approach that risked damaging the contents. Deciding to call it a day, they left for the diner, carefully lugging the box with them. Another wave of excitement surged through Marge as they emerged into the crisp, bright daylight. They had something real, something tangible that might unravel an old Lilybridge thread. Back at Jenna's diner, Gil retrieved a small kit from his truck. Marge had the sense to usher them into the kitchen so they wouldn't attract too much attention from the few customers lingering in the booths. With Harriet standing lookout, Gil carefully applied a drill bit to the lock. Tiny metal filings fell away, and Marge held her breath. After several tense minutes, a final click sounded. The box was open. Inside, neat sheaves of paper sat stacked beside an old photograph. A hush settled over them as Gil lifted out the top document. It was a letter typed and signed by Leopold Finch, addressed to a man named Russell Cavanaugh, who was, years ago, the mayor of Lilybridge. Harriet gasped. I've read about Cavanaugh in old council meeting transcripts. He had a short but controversial run in office. People either adored him, the letter read like a plea. Finch accused Cavanaugh of funneling money from the rail line into his personal funds. Finch wrote that he had proof, hidden away, threatening to go public if Cavanaugh didn't restore the stolen money. Marge felt her heart thump in her chest. This was bigger than she'd anticipated. The next page was a ledger showing questionable deposits and withdrawals from an account under Cavanaugh's name, correlating suspiciously with losses the rail station had sustained. If Finch had tried to blow the whistle, it could explain the swirling rumors of financial irregularities and why the station had suddenly failed. Marge thought of how Finch retreated from the public eye. Perhaps he'd been forced out or threatened. Then Harriet lifted the photograph, a black and white snapshot of Finch standing beside an elegantly dressed man. A handwritten note on the back identified him as Russell Cavanaugh. They stood, presumably at the train station, with forced smiles. "This is quite the find," Harriet murmured, protecting the faded picture from the overhead lights. Gil whistled, half in awe. "You think something like this can still matter now, decades later?" Marge glanced at the documents. Some people in Lilybridge had long memories. Even if Cavanaugh was long gone from the political scene, the scandal could still shake the town's comfortable narrative about why the station closed. By nightfall, Harriet offered to keep the lockbox safe in the library's private archives while they decided the next steps. Marge agreed, though she tossed and turned until morning, her mind abuzz. Should they reveal the documents to the local newspaper, the Lilybridge Gazette? Most people who had personal stakes in the old scandal might have passed on, or at least left town. But there was one name still relevant. Cavanaugh's son, Martin, a current city council member. He was known for championing new development projects, bragging about his father's legacy. If the elder Cavanaugh had done something crooked, how would Martin react? The next day, Harriet called Marge at the diner, voice laced with concern. "I emailed a scanned copy of the documents to my cousin, who's a lawyer," Harriet confessed softly. "We need to know if we're dredging up issues that could cause trouble, legal or otherwise." Marge paused mid-stir of a pot of soup. "Trouble for who?" Harriet hesitated. "All of us, maybe, if we handle this the wrong way. If Martin or the town tries to hush it up, or if we publicly accuse a deceased mayor of a crime without thorough evidence, it could get messy." Marge exhaled softly. Usually, her biggest concerns were whether the gravy had enough seasoning or if the coffee was fresh. This was a different scale entirely. Still, she felt a stubborn surge of moral duty. Lilybridge's unwritten rule was that truth should come out, even if it rattled a few comfortable illusions. A few days later, Harriet's cousin responded. The documents were compelling, but they didn't outright prove criminal wrongdoing without further records. Yet the ledger and letter hinted strongly at unethical behavior by the then-mayor. Finch's notes indicated that if something happened to him, the ledger would exonerate him of any blame for the station's failings. Notably, Finch wrote that he'd confided in an ally on the city council, though he never named them. If they pinpointed that ally, maybe more documentation existed. Marge mulled over who had been on the council at the time. She remembered a kindly old man named Alan Lloyd, who'd once visited the diner every Tuesday. She once overheard him mention he served on the council in the late 1970s. He lived in a retirement home just outside of Lilybridge now. She decided to pay Mr. Lloyd a visit. It was early afternoon when Marge parked her hatchback outside Maplewood Retirement Home. The scent of chrysanthemums greeted her, and she found Alan Lloyd in a sunroom, wearing a cardigan despite the warm day. He recognized her instantly, greeting her with a gentle smile. "Marge Wells from Jenner's Diner. I remember your biscuits and gravy," he teased. She wasted no time explaining her discovery, though she omitted some details about the lockbox's contents, for caution's sake. At the mention of Leopold Finch, Lloyd's grey eyes flashed with something like regret. "He was a decent man," Lloyd said softly. "We tried to stand up to Kavanagh's strong-arm tactics, but Russell had powerful supporters. And Finch, well, he was in deeper than he realized." But Lloyd wouldn't say more, just quietly stated that Finch left Lilybridge after everything collapsed. He believed Finch had wanted to protect his family from retaliation. Marge felt a sense of sorrow for the station master. If Finch's hidden lockbox was his last attempt to reveal the truth, maybe Lilybridge owed him some vindication. She shared these thoughts with Harriet that evening, and together they decided it was time to approach Martin Kavanagh. They wanted to be fair. If the younger Kavanagh had no knowledge of his father's actions, they owed him the chance to see the documents before they aired the story publicly. Harriet set up a meeting at the library's reading room, inviting Martin under the guise of showing him recently uncovered historical materials. Marge felt her stomach flutter with nerves the whole day leading up to that meeting. News travelled fast in Lilybridge, and she didn't want to paint a target on the library or the diner, but the moment felt inevitable. When Martin arrived, wearing a crisp navy suit and carrying the air of politeness befitting a public official, Harriet led him to a table in the quiet reading room. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, dancing dust swirling in the beams. Marge watched from a chair in the corner as Harriet methodically showed Martin the ledger, Finch's letter, and the photograph. Martin's polite smile rapidly faded. Although he maintained outward composure, Marge saw tension stiffen his shoulders. I've never seen these documents," he said, voice low. "I knew my father fought to preserve Lilybridge's growth strategy, but I never suspected anything like this." Harriet offered him a seat, which he sank into. Marge tried to read his face. Was he angry, shocked, or was there some hidden knowledge flickering behind his eyes? After a long silence, Martin admitted that he'd heard quiet rumors as a child, bits and pieces about station money that vanished, and hushes in the house whenever Finch's name came up. But his father always carried himself as a man of distinction. "Did my father's actions force Finch out of Lilybridge?" Martin murmured. "If so, I owe Mr. Finch and his family an apology." His voice sounded sincere, tinged with guilt. He rubbed his temples, glancing again at the ledger as if trying to rewrite history by sheer will. Harriet watched him carefully, as did Marge. They hadn't expected such a subdued reaction. "I suppose I have to make this right," Martin said. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Let me speak with the other council members. The station's closure was a piece of Lilybridge history that shaped our town in more ways than we realize. Perhaps it's time to rectify that story." Relief washed over Marge. Martin wasn't denying or threatening them into silence, but acknowledging the possible wrongdoing. Harriet slid the documents back into the lockbox. She suggested Martin help the library officially archive the materials, with a statement acknowledging their importance, and, if Martin truly wanted to honor his father's memory, he might lead the effort to restore the old station or at least preserve it as a historical site. Martin nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's a piece of Lilybridge we shouldn't hide," he agreed. "I'll see to it that we approach this carefully. Maybe an exhibit about the station's history, the good and the bad." Word travelled faster than a bullet train in Lilybridge. Within a week, talk of the lockbox's revelation rippled through the diner. Patrons who once whispered about rumours now openly discussed Finch's and Kavanagh's roles in the closure. Gossip gave way to pride when Martin announced plans to restore the station's facade, turning the building into a community centre. Although the details were still in the works, the promise gave the old station new life. Harriet was positively glowing at the prospect of an exhibit that would showcase Lilybridge's vibrant railroad past, while acknowledging the scandal that nearly erased it. Early one morning, Marge stood again at the diner's windows, gazing across at the station. Sunrise cast the building's old stones in a rosy light. A modest crew of workers, some hired on behalf of the council, some volunteers, unloaded supplies from a truck. The stale hush that once pressed in on the place seemed lifted. As daylight spread, so too did a sense of possibility. Marge smiled, stirring biscuit batter with a lighter heart. She could imagine the station halls bustling once more, if not with departing trains, then with after-school programs, weekend craft fairs or historical tours. She pictured a plaque dedicated to Leopold Finch, acknowledging his role and how he tried to protect the station he loved. Not long after, Harriet stopped by the diner, a grin etched wide on her face. "You won't believe the letter I received," she announced, brandishing an envelope with a West Coast return address. "It's from Leopold Finch himself, or rather from his daughter Lucy Finch." Lucy had heard about the Lockbox discovery through Lilybridge's revived interest in the station. She wrote that her father was still alive, though elderly. He'd relocated years ago, never setting foot in Lilybridge again. Lucy expressed gratitude that her father's reputation might finally be cleared. "He never wanted to leave," Lucy wrote, "Ridge Station more than anything. Thank you for uncovering the truth he couldn't prove years ago." Marge found her eyes prickling with tears. The real treasure, it turned out, wasn't just a dusty metal box with incriminating papers. Nor was it an indictment of a long-past mayor's misdeeds. The treasure was redemption. The knowledge that Lilybridge's history would now be more honest, that an old station master might be acknowledged rather than blamed. If the station found a second life, maybe it could ripple out into the rest of the town, reminding folks that sometimes the best path forward involves confronting the past. As the lunchtime rush picked up, Agnes slid into a booth with her usual sweet smile, while Mr. Lynch ambled in, favouring his back. The bell above the door jingled repeatedly. Conversations hummed in the background. Out of the corner of her eye, Marge caught Harriet sipping coffee at the counter, reading Lucy Finch's letter for the second time. This was cosy Lilybridge at its best, weaving old memories with new beginnings. Marge poured a steady stream of coffee into chipped mugs, content in the knowledge that, though Lilybridge might appear a sleepy little town, it was no stranger to secrets that begged to be unearthed. And in this case, unraveling one train station scandal brought the possibility of healing, of renewal, and a sense that Lilybridge's warm light could shine brighter now that an old shadow had finally been lifted.